Welcome back. It's Mississippi Stories. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, editor-at-large at Mississippi Today. Got a great guest today. I'm very excited to talk to him, and I think you're going to enjoy this conversation as well. He is a businessman. He is a philanthropist, easy for me to say. And of course, he was Secretary of State for the state of Mississippi from 1984 to 1996, ran for governor, was one of the original Boys of Spring, and was the first person hired, I guess, by Governor Winter, which is a pretty darn nice title to have, considering I think we all respect Governor Winter. So we'll talk about that too, but we have Dick Molpus with us today. Dick, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Marshall, for having me. It's my pleasure.
You know, honestly, I feel like I left a whole bunch of stuff off your bio there, but we'll just talk about it all. I think because you've had an incredibly varied career that's kind of come and gone in stages, but I think each one of them you've had a huge impact with what you've done, and it's very interesting. It seems like the same level of excellence on every time, and I'm not, sucking up to you on the interview. It's just basically the facts of the case. You started out,
or you could say I just can't hold a job for very long. Maybe it too.
Hey, I resemble that remark. I know how that goes. So, but life's more interesting that way. Definitely. Born and raised in Philadelphia, Mississippi. It's funny because, I think some of the nicest people I've ever met are from Philadelphia, and sometimes some of the scariest folks are from Philadelphia. And we, of course, know the history. And you were 14 when that fateful day happened with the 3 civil rights workers and everything. Tell us a little bit, what was that like at the time, being 14 years old and having the whole nation's gaze upon your town?
Well, it was a transforming experience for me. Of course, most 14-year-olds boys have other things on their mind besides politics and governance. But all of a sudden, Philadelphia, Mississippi, which had not ever been even on WTOK in Meridian, was on Walter Cronkite News. And it was obvious. We're in the middle of a historic thing. And I was just a kid, but I learned some real lessons from that. I'm related to Turner Catledge, who was a former editor of the New York Times. And he came to Philadelphia, Mississippi when I was a 14-year-old, gathered a bunch of business leaders in my father's bedroom. And my job was to sit by Turner Catledge. And when he needed more scotch, he would shake his glass and I would take his and run in the kitchen, pour him more scotch and bring it back. But I listened to him and he told the business leaders, the white business leaders in Mississippi, that this is your moment. You can either step up or step back. And you'll be remembered, and you'll remember in your heart what you did. And I saw, unfortunately, in my hometown, so many people in positions of power and influence step back. And it made a big impact on me. And I saw, obviously, some people we knew in Philadelphia step up, a lot of courage and commitment from African-Americans, African-American churches. But it just kind of made things focus for me that if people don't get engaged, don't get involved, then all of a sudden silence becomes acquiescence to what's happening. So yeah, it changed my life. That's your question.
Yeah, you think about that at the same time that Turner Catledge gave that advice, Ivan Allen over in Atlanta and the business leaders over in Atlanta were doing just that. And it just shows that it had Mississippi and Atlanta ended up having totally 2 different outcomes.
That's right. Atlanta became the city too busy to hate. And Mississippi got into this whole mire that we've yet to come out of, where we divide along racial lines. And there's 2. Atlanta at that time was just a couple of times bigger than Hinds County.
Yeah.
And so you can see, and of course, that's where you grew up. So you know it full well.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting, the history of that. Talk a little bit about your parents, because your dad was a business leader at that time. Your mom, just was a force in nature, and I really miss her. I used to love seeing her out at the Neshoba County Fair every year. But I have a feeling that your love of education and everything came from her.
Yeah. Well, my mother was a remarkable woman, grew up in Decatur, Mississippi. She was deaf from a childhood disease, but she never saw herself as disabled. She never went to college. She went to secretarial school. But became a reader of the classics. And she had a real empathy and understanding. She grew up in a large family during the Depression. They struggled. I was always nervous to open the refrigerator at home because she never threw food away from that Depression era. but I developed and saw from her a real respect for the human condition, and that respect didn't have to come from who you were, what your title was, how much money you made, but just who you were as a person. And so I was real lucky. And my father was a businessman who in the sawmill business there, and I was proud of him. He refused to fire workers of his who were going to the NAACP meetings, and the Citizens Council came to see him and told him they would go burn his lumber mill down. And so he handled it like the way he should have. He hired a couple of meanest guys in Neshoba County with deer rifles and stayed at a sawmill all night. So nothing ever happened for obvious reasons. But see, I was fortunate.
You went off to Ole Miss and got a business degree and came back and worked in the business. Talk about that. I mean, was that kind of just naturally what you thought you were going to do?
Well, my grandfather started that business in 1905, and so I just assumed that I was by heredity going to do that for the rest of my life. But then I did it for 7 years and worked in the lumber business. My father had a stroke, so I ended up as a 26-year-old, way over my head, running a pretty big sawmill company. But my father got better, and I'd always volunteered for Governor Winter since I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. And I was just ready to. I loved the lumber business, but you can just make so many 2x4s, if you know what I mean. You got to, and I felt like I could maybe feed my soul and help Governor Winter, help this state. And so when he called in 1979, I had a new baby, built a new home, and said, absolutely. Got over to Jackson, and I was meeting him at his campaign headquarters, and he says, all right, let's meet back later this afternoon at the Walter Sillars building, which of course is a huge office building for government. And I didn't have the nerve to tell him I didn't know where the Walter Sillars building was. So that was my first time to go to work for him.
You said you worked with him early on. How'd you come across and how'd you meet Governor Winter?
Well, again, I was kind of a weird little kid at age 14. I would go down and listen. I was interested in politics and governance and policy. And I would actually, at the Neshoba County Fair, go down to the pavilion, and there I was, 14-year-old kid with Coke bottle glasses, swooped back hair, had a muscle shirt, didn't have any muscles in it, and so I was listening to him, and I heard all that racist stuff about, one of the gubernatorial candidates called the NAACP, the N-word agitators, apes, coons, and possums. And so I was thinking, this is disgusting. And I'm so on for it. And then Governor Winter comes up and says, at the time, pretty radical. He says that I want to speak to the night riders out there who are burning churches, who are beating people, that this is wrong. We live in a country that people can do what they want to, say what they want to, which sounds pretty. I mean, after it was over, I couldn't get around to the back of the pavilion fast enough to shake his hand in this little squeaky voice with Coke bottle glass. I said, I'm your man in Neshoba County. And so he said, you're right, you're my man. And so from age 14, I stayed with him until the day he died when he was 97.
I know, Governor Winter is one of those kind of people that, there aren't many people that can pass away at 97 and you think they died too soon.
That's beautifully said. And Marshall, I loved your cartoon of him showing up at the pearly gates and the African-American. They were opening the gates for him and saying to him, and it looked like Governor Winter with his briefcase, thin face, said, you left Mississippi a better place. I thought, what can you say?
He did. And you were a big part of that too. Of course, the Educational Reform Act that was pushed through, which was literally like trying to, push a rope or something. I've talked, for years I worked at the Clarion Ledger. I worked with David Hampton and, the editorial board there. And of course they had a big part in it too of, putting people's pictures on the front page of the paper and everything else and pushing on that. That was such a revolutionary time to get anything as volunteer kindergarten, for instance, pushed through. Tell us a little bit about that and what was your role as being one of the boys of spring?
Well, that was another defining moment for me. I realized that with leadership, we could actually make a change, and things divided over that fight about public kindergartens, compulsory education, compulsory school attendance accreditation. And Jack Reed described it one day. Jack Reed founded famous businessman from Tupelo, head of the Mississippi Economic Council, and a progressive Republican who got into government because he wanted to do better. He worked with us and Governor Winter, a Republican, and he said, look, this is the way Mississippi's dividing up. He said, you got people who want to do better for this state, that they're not happy being last in per capita income or seeing us racially divided or poor health care. And it says, and so we're the do better party. And he said, now the other party are, I call them, as Jack Reed called, Ginners. I'm against this, I'm against that, and they're Ginners. And so we're going to divide this state among the do better party and the Ginners. And so here we are in 2021. And, if I were emperor, I would do away with political parties and make two parties, the do better party and the Ginner party, and let the do betters explain how we can make it better and let the Ginners give it their best shot on how they defeat it. So anyway, that was a lesson I learned.
It's really hard though, and this is just my experience of being on the periphery of politics for 30 something years, I guess now, that it's always so much easier to motivate people with fear than it is with being able to give them hope or a prospect of a better future. You've experienced that in your life I know we're not going to totally jump ahead to your running for governor, but I know, in 1989, I think that's right, the 25th anniversary, you spoke at Mount Zion Church and you apologized on behalf of the state of Mississippi for what happened that fateful night, with the civil rights workers, and you received death threats and everything else. And then when you run for governor, you were actually, that was used against you as what is it about fear in politics that makes it so, I don't know, it seems to be so frequently used?
Well, because fear is a very, very powerful motivator, and protecting the status quo for some people is very important. And, looking back on that 1989 speech, you have times in your life where opportunity presents itself and you can either step up or step back. The lesson I learned sitting around in that living room back in '64, and I said I was going to step up. And I told my staff that, and one of my staff members said to the other staff member, said, this is Dick's continued ongoing effort to whack off every white voter in Mississippi. And I said, okay, well, I'll take that risk. And Lloyd Gray, who was my press secretary, he and I wrote that apology together. And I have to tell you, governors come and go, and I'm sorry I didn't win that race because I think I could have helped, but I pretty much sleep well at night because that was my moment. And I think it made a difference. And I still go in grocery stores there. I have people come up hug me. And wow. I thought no one would ever say that on behalf of the state of Mississippi. And so I hope it helped. It affected my governor's race. So be it. I've lived another life, owned other things. Well, but I feel good about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. You have lived many lives. You were, and of course, backing up a little bit, you ran for Secretary of State. You won it from 84 to 96, which is a good run for that. And you took an office that was losing money and turned it into a profit-making, agency. I think you were like losing 800,000 and ended up 2 million or something like that. And you got all kinds of national recognition for the job you did. How hard, you could have probably stayed in that role forever if you wanted to, or at least up until recently, probably.
Well, no, I think I could have.
Yeah.
Heber Ladner, who preceded me, was there like a lifetime. But, I didn't get into politics just to make a living or to, quite frankly, file corporate charters or do any of those kind of things Secretary of State did. I didn't really talk about that. We ran a good office, a successful office, became profitable. But what I loved was like the 16th section public school lands. Those issues that bring up your soul are like, we pushed through mail-in voter registration because the Secretary of State is the chief election official. And I love that fight. In the legislature, our opponents, one of the Ginners stood up and said, look, if Molpus gets through this mail-in voter registration, what's going to happen is that pretty soon everyone's going to want to vote. I love that kind of fight,
Yeah.
And so, that's what really drew me in, not so much just the job and quite frankly, I just assumed be an anonymous guy. I never particularly liked the limelight or even going in restaurants where usually the drunkest guy in there would come sit down and tell me his personal opinion about everything in Mississippi. I never really liked that, but I loved a good fight.
Yeah, that's the thing, because in some states, if you're a statewide elected official, you have your security detail and you never really bump into the people. But here in Mississippi, I mean, like most people come up to your cabin porch and on the Neshoba County Fair and sit there and chew the fat with you. It's just politics is totally different in this state.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
You can connect with people.
You talk about 16 section land. Now that's an issue that if you try to adjust people's leases, I mean, that's like literally trying to start World War III with a lot of folks. What was that like, coming in and trying to reform some of those, sweetheart leases and doing some of those battles? Because I know that had to be probably as contentious as anything you've done in your career.
Oh, it was. And you mentioned the word fear. I just had to put it in the back of my mind. I was going to do this. And, the worst thing is to live a life with not having the nerve to step up and do it. So I ended up with security guards for 2 years, going with me everywhere. I had so many death threats. But there were 10,000 leases, public school lands called 16th section land, that were leased to buddies, friends, brother-in-laws, for less than 10 cents an acre a year. 10 cents an acre a year. Some of this prime farmland, recreational land, and land in city. So anyway, we broke the Secretary of State's office. We broke every one of those leases because the Constitution says there has to be fair, price for school children. And so we won all 10,000 of those we won. But I assure you, people that had nickel and acre leases that went up to $20 an acre weren't real happy with this. There's still some towns I can't go in Mississippi where they don't wave at me with all 5 fingers, if you know what I mean.
You're number one.
Exactly. That's what they're probably saying. But anyway, we started out and we were getting $2 million from 16th section land, and when I left, we were getting $24 million, 12 times as much. And thank goodness Eric Clark and Delbert Holzman kept that up. And gosh, I think they're up in 50, 60 million now. So yeah, I felt that's the kind of fight I love.
Yeah, like you said, it's a lot of people that aren't from Mississippi don't quite understand how that works. But in a lot of counties where you don't have a lot of industry or a lot of business and don't have much taxation, and maybe the home values aren't that high, that's one of the primary sources of income for the schools.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely on that. You like I said, you ran against Fordyce. I missed it, because honestly, I didn't get here till 96. So I totally missed that campaign.
You missed a good one.
Yeah, there were some classic moments definitely on that. Definitely not dull. That night when you lost the election, did you kind of have a sense of where you were going to go from that point with your life and with your career?
Well, I would like to say no, but I had 2 young children to educate. And so I had read this article about timberland investment management organizations, companies that marry finance and timber knowledge together and work for pension funds, college endowments. And I cut that article out. This was 2 years before 1995. And so the day after the election, that popped back up on my desk. So I began to prepare and started a business from scratch.
Wow.
To which worked, and sent my kids to college, and now we employ a lot of people and manage a lot of property for a lot of pension funds and college endowments.
Yeah, I would say that it's done really, really well. You were named in 2005 as an inductee to the Mississippi Business Hall of Fame.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't do it, but they did it because obviously something went really well. But I'm like you said, to make that transition, but it's not like you completely, you were still focused on obviously running a business and doing that successfully. But you and your wife both, this whole fire that had been lit in you when you were 14 years old was still continuing on, being able to give back to the community, give back to schools. Tell us a little bit about that too, because obviously there was that, I'm going to sit down and create a business from scratch, but y'all probably sat down and said, okay, these are some different ways we can give back to Mississippi and give back to.
Yes, with the philosophy that you can do well financially and do good at the same time.
Yeah.
And that was the philosophy. We started Parents for Public Schools back 30 years ago. It started in our living room. You know, been a part of one of the co-founders of the Parents Campaign. You know, I love that stuff. And right now, I am selling my stock in my company almost to the employees, to the people who built it up.
Yeah.
I didn't want to sell it to a New York investment firm or Boston firm. These people live in Mississippi. They helped me start. They took the risk. And now they're going to be the owners, except for about a quarter of it. And that's going into a foundation that's going to do only policy work to improve the lives of the 500,000 children in Mississippi who go to public schools. So I've been able to do business and to keep up with what kind of feeds my heart.
You obviously, Paris for Public School, by the way, and it's now nationwide. I mean, this isn't just, it's not something on there, it's grown and so forth.
Yeah, it's in San Francisco, it's in Honolulu, it's in Syracuse, New York. It really has spread.
Well, let's talk public schools for a minute, because I had a public school education. My wife did, my kids have. I mean, I've been very lucky that we all went to great public schools, and there obviously are a lot of public schools that are challenging. You know, some people say, well, don't throw money at it. Sometimes I say, well, it's not like we've ever tried that before, but you know, that's fine. Talk about the state of public education right now, not only in Mississippi, but just nationwide. Where are we with that?
Well, it's spotty across the country. You have some places that are absolutely wonderful, other places where it's chaos and children are being shortchanged. And moving back to Mississippi, the public schools, the quality of the public schools is our future. I mean, that's it. And I know that's trite, but fact is, as we move into this new economic age, you know, this whole thing about attracting industry by giving, saying you come here with cheap labor, don't have to give benefits, we'll give you huge corporate tax cuts. I mean, that's total hooey. That was 1950s, moonlight, magnolia, moonshine type economic development. Where we're going now in the future is where people want to live, and they want to live in educated communities that have good schools, have good law enforcement, have good neighborhoods, where they have good neighbors, where there are parks. All those things are called quality of life. In Mississippi, we are still moving back to that 1950s, rather than focusing on educating our children through good K through 12, through colleges, through making our communities better. And we've seen during this COVID thing, so many more people now have the option to live where they want to. Yeah. And Mississippi is losing more college educated people than any state in the nation. So we've got a lot to do with K through 12. For example, Initiative 42, I was one of the co-chairs of that. And I couldn't imagine why we would not pass something that said every child is entitled to an adequate education. And until we break that and stop letting beginners stop things like Initiative 42, we'll be going along just where we are now at the bottom of the economic ladder across this nation. That's my sermonette of the day.
No, that'll preach. That'll preach. You know, you talked about Jack Reed, and I've always said that Jack Reed Sr. should have been governor. You know, I mean, he would have been a good governor. But the thing about Tupelo and the mindset of that community has always been in the CDF. Yeah, see if I get that right. If I didn't, I apologize, Tupelo, because you're good folks. But Tupelo's always had the mindset that, you know, education's important and a big part of business. You know, and it's not just Jack. I mean, literally, it's the whole community. And that played a big role in them getting Toyota, for instance. You know, even, you know, with the furniture business, you know, of course, with the globalization and so forth, I mean, there was some stress on that, but then they give Toyota. I was interviewing Tate Taylor not long ago on another episode of this, and he was talking about what he's doing down in Natchez, which is incredible. He's really creating a movie centered empire down there with, you know, and creating jobs and so forth. But he said to me, and he said, Marshall, he said, it's hard for me to convince my friends to come here when we have F-rated schools.
Yes.
You know, how do we get past that? I mean, how do we get past where maybe, how do you get a community that has an F-rated school to turn that thing around, to get it up to a C or a B or even up to an A? What changes are we going to have to make in the state to be able to do that? I mean, obviously,
it gets around the community leadership that crosses all kind of racial lines, one of the things I loved about Governor Winter and Jack Reed, they had a vision. The way Jack Reed said we're going to do economic development in Tupelo is to make our schools one of the best in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And that worked. When he, as industries there, they don't, I've never had an industry say to me, I want to come to your state because you've got the cheapest labor. Because if they want cheap labor, they can go to Mexico, they can go to third and fourth world countries. I have never, and look, we have 18 offices around the nation in Idaho and just all the UP up Michigan. Never once do we look at, is this the cheapest place for us to go? We look where we can attract the highest quality employees. We've got 3 offices in Philadelphia, 1 in Philadelphia, and we started an office in Hattiesburg. It's got 30 some odd people in it. And the reason we went there is because Hattiesburg's got the university, it's got arts, it's a community that's backing. It's not just Tupelo, it's backing real economic development. And that's going to be the future. These communities that say we're going to have separate schools, one for the wealthier whites and one for the poor African Americans, those are dead. I mean, goners, don't buy a house there. You know, they're dead economically, their soul is dead. So it really comes back to nurturing leaders, not to fall in the Ginner camp, but to fall in the let's do better camp and do that across partisan lines.
You've done it. You've obviously parents for public school. And I remember going to some of the meetings. I had some friends, Tom and Mary Esther Schnaubalt back in the day. They invited us to some of the meetings. Yeah, they were good folks and they invited us to meetings. It was kind of neat to hear what we're doing. Do you think that grassroots coming up from the bottom, that parents, that's what's going to drive it? Or do you think it's going to have to come from the top?
I think it's going to come from both places.
Yeah.
It's got, and the reason we created Parents for Public Schools, it's got to have come from the parents. They've got to demand high quality schools and say, we're not going to accept crummy schools for our children, but we're going to get in there, not leave, but we're going to get in there and make it better to lift up our child, not just, I mean, all children, not just our child. And I firmly believe this, that people who go through, you went to Sprayberry High School, and I've got a friend who's a football coach there. Yeah, and so I've seen those communities, and in places like Sprayberry, you say you need an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and they're building it next week because that's what parents do. They're engaged in that community, and so you got to have that combination of that and then light and leadership, which is why I fought on the state level to try to get that from the top and to marry that with parents. The only reason we overran the Ginners back with Governor Winter when I was a Boy Spring is that we took it directly to the people, took it directly to the parents, and all of a sudden it was like a hallelujah moment for the legislators who were fighting it. All of a sudden they'd see 500 of their parishioners out there, and all of a sudden we're for you. And that's the power that I've seen with that parents could have.
Hey, you got a good point, because like I said, to bring up Sprayberry, when I went there back 35 years ago, my dad was in the school nearly every day. He had a car garage shop, but he was there dropping off cars, dropping them off. He was checking up on me probably, but he knew more what was going on in that school than I did. And my friends and I, I've got one friend who's a mayor of Cartersville, Georgia, another one that started 2 software companies. We all that played football together, we've done really well. And we all give credit to the fact that our parents were completely involved. And, they raised money for a football stadium, like you said. They made sure that we had money for whatever we needed academically as well. And that was a big part of it. And I've seen, and I've been lucky growing up where we live here. Growing up, I'm pretty grown up, but I mean, with my kids watching, you go to meet the teacher night and you can't get in the parking lot, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of commitment you're talking about on that.
Well, it goes further than just that, Marshall. It gets the community together, because in the public schools, you have people from all kind of backgrounds, cultures, and that brings us together. And it's better than having these little discussion groups about how we're going to meet another culture, another race. I mean, that's real action, working together. And people say, well, we share the same thing because we want good schools for our children. It's really kind of magical to watch.
Yeah. And of course, Friday night football doesn't hurt either.
Of course not. I mean, that's real stuff.
Exactly. It brings the whole community together.
And I love Friday night football. Yeah.
No, I did. I think that's, and I've lived in Texas, which everybody talks about Friday night lights out there, but I think in Mississippi, it truly, you capture the spirit of a town every Friday night, definitely.
Absolutely, you do.
Let's talk about Governor Winter a little bit and some of your memories of him and things that made him special in your eyes.
Guys, we don't have 3 or 4 hours here, but it's hard to do a summary of that. He was a beautiful man to work for. Never got angry, never lost his temper, never let his power go to his head. And we had all these young staffers. His press secretary was 22 years old, for God's sakes, barely out of college, and I was 28. We thought we knew a whole lot of stuff, but we didn't. But he was so good with us to encourage us. For example, we'd come up with some really cranked up idea we thought was great, had a lot of energy, but kind of lacked on the wisdom part. And he would listen to us. And at that time, I don't think it was conscious. He lost his hearing in his right ear. So he'd be listening to us with his left ear. And then if it just got too crazy, he would kind of slowly turn around in his chair. And and you knew it was time to get out. So he was generally, he was a happy warrior, a joyful warrior. And, after he was beat on the education of our public kindergartens in 1980, 81, and 82, we went, several his boys this spring, got together. We came up with this bodacious plan. Said, Governor, we want to go one more time in a special session. We think you're going to lose, but we think that we're going to make these parents so mad that we're going to throw the legislators out who are against us. And the next governor will get the credit, and you will go down as an ineffective, weak governor. And it's his story. And so we threw that out, and he thought about it. He said, let's do it.
He didn't care.
I mean, that just said it all. We didn't run any polls. It was, I'll do that. Let's do that. And off we went. And much to his surprise and ours too, that we passed that by one vote in the Senate. And it was one of the most moving nights of my life. Yeah. And so anyway, plus after it was over, I mean, he didn't stop. I mean, he really believed that we should work together, that this basic stuff we learn in church, we should love each other. And he believed that. And so he became a spokesperson for racial reconciliation, served on President Clinton's task force, gave hundreds of speeches around Mississippi to lift that leadership up. So, and I've heard all those speeches dozens and dozens of times, but I was still always inspired. And so he was a mentor, a friend, and an inspiration for me. And I was so fortunate to have had him in my life.
What's one thing that you can credit in your life that he changed?
Changed my whole life. When I got this call when I was 29 years old, I was ready to do something different, 28. And so all of a sudden I was gone from being in business, which at that time was pretty narrowly focused, to having this great opportunity. What I didn't know, I thought if I took his job offer to come in 1980, then 1984, we'd have this place fixed and it'd be all over and I could go on to other things, but kind of misjudged that timing a bit. So here I am at my age, still engaged on it. But he gave me a hope that we could change. I got to see the best of politics. I got to see nobility. Yeah. I got to see honor. I mean, how often would you see that now? Because it's, as you know, become pretty craven and pretty cynical. So yeah, it was life-changing and a beautiful thing. And I'm fortunate to have been there.
And I used to love, and like I said, I remember one time I was doing a book signing with him, and it was great because here we were, I was sitting at a table with a portrait of him behind me in a building named for him, we're at the Archives and History, and there's his portrait behind me, and I'm sitting there with William Winter, but he's telling stories, oh yeah, the old Capitol, they nearly turned it was a hay barn, and we nearly tore it down, we had no money, and he's talking about when the state was so broke, they could, they were like looking in the vault trying to find loose change, and it was fascinating, his political growth throughout the years. I mean, he went from, having a position that made him one of the richest politicians in the country, because of prohibition and so forth. But he kind of woke up racially. I mean, and had to run against that. It was just a fascinating, his little slice of time. So much changed in Mississippi. It was just fun to sit down and listen to him talk about it.
Yes, and think about someone of that age and the culture he grew up in. His grandfather was a Confederate soldier who lived in the home he grew up in, lived in his son's home.
Wow.
And Governor Winter's middle name is William F. Winter. The
Yeah.
F, you may not know this, is Forrest, named after the Confederate general who founded the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
That's what his grandfather believed. And so you have this man who makes his whole transition into being the beacon of light for humanity and for decency that came from that background. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
And the thing was, you know, and I know he had the fall there toward the end, but he was sharp right up until the very end too. And it was just always fun to sit there and talk to him. And I was glad because he took such a beating during the 2001 flag vote that he lived long enough to see the flag actually get changed.
Which is what he said to me. He said, "I am glad I lived to see this day."
Wow. Wow. When was the last time you got to speak to him?
4 days before he died. That was COVID, so we were keeping everyone away from him because he obviously wouldn't have gotten it. But and I talked to his family. I was the spokesperson for his family when he died. So yeah, I was just real blessed to start as a teenager. And I told him I worked in so many elections for him that I was started when I was 14. I was ready to join AARP by the time, you know, by that date, 30 years later. So yeah, it's very rare to have that kind of fortune.
Well, don't worry about AARP because they send out those letters earlier and earlier every year.
Plus, it gets worse.
Yeah, I think my kid's gotten one. So on that, Dick, you're 71 years old. You have seen Mississippi change a lot, and you've seen a lot of things not change. Mm-hmm. Talk about the things that have changed the most that surprised you a little bit, and talk about some of the things that you really feel like that we really need to work harder on.
Well, what I've seen change is changing when you got good leadership. You follow me? Where you speak to the people. Mississippi is people portray us as being backwards, ignorant, all those things. And we do have the lowest educational status in the country. But what gives me, and so I've been pleased when I look at things like Initiative 42, we'd have won that had the legislature not done that trickery with the other amendment to it. If you look at Medicaid, I think we're going to have Medicaid expansion at some point, just simply because there's 300,000 people who could have health care. And it will could pay for itself because there are 19,000 new jobs come to that. And so I think sometimes the people are way ahead of the politicians. The politicians, we're still seeing what I don't like is too much playing to fear, to the bias, to the differences. You know, we do business all over the world. And I assure you, I've had to explain that rebel flag many times because a lot of these particular very sensitive institutions don't want to be associated with that. So I've had to convince people that we are a good state. We're not here out of any other, there's not this kind of meanness, that there's this real gentleness if you can pull it out of people. And that's why you have governors or leaders that pull to the best of people or pull to the worst, just for their own selfish interest. And I assure you, Governor Winter's going to be remembered forever and ever. Those politicians who built their future on anger and hate and bias, you'll forget them 4 or 8 years after they're out of office. So that's what I'm encouraged. And finally, we've got 800,000 people less than 40 years old, and a lot of them have different views of this society. So I hope we're going to get back to what Atlanta does and recognize that our future rests not with fighting each other, that we aren't each other's enemy. We're each other's friends. We're fellow citizens. We're in community with each other. And our real enemies are not each other. Our real enemies are ignorance, illiteracy, poverty, disease, all those things which we can fix. And I do see a whole generation of people coming up who share those values.
Well, do you think sometimes, and you know, not to point fingers, but say a politician who doesn't necessarily want or can't or doesn't understand how to fix those issues you just talked about, maybe it is easier to have divide people and keep them afraid, and maybe that would turn out people to have them come vote than it is to try to solve. I mean, is that what it is, or you just think it's just sheer, I don't know, callousness or laziness? I'm not quite sure how to say that.
Or maybe all of the above. It's hard to read in someone's mind and in their heart. But
Yeah.
for example, I hear the opponents to Medicaid. It's Obamacare. That's not Obamacare. That was passed in 1965 with Medicare.
Yeah.
And I would guarantee you those people, some of them who fighting Medicaid, have a whole slew of parents and on Medicare. I mean, it's one of the best things that ever happened to us. But that's fear. That's preying on ignorance. So a lot of people don't like President Obama, so it's Obamacare. Obamacare was about private insurance. It was about pre-existing conditions, so insurance companies couldn't cut you out. It was about letting people stay on the 26. Medicaid is about paying health care for the working poor, not the worst, not the lowest of the lowest, but people who are working in the convenience stores, the servers, the gig jobs, hardworking people who have no insurance. So that's the whole topic that I'd love to see the Do Better Party fighting against again or something, because the facts are clearly on the Do Better side.
Well, it's also been interesting hearing you talk to hospital administrators and so forth, and especially in the rural hospitals where, the whole system of somebody getting the flu and going to an emergency room is such an expensive proposition. And it's one where they may not have the funds to cover it, then the hospital has to eat it. And it's just, it is interesting. I think this is going to be, depending what the Supreme Court does with the medical marijuana referendum, whether or not that whole avenue is still open on that a little bit. You talk about the brain drain. I interviewed a really couple cool young entrepreneurs in Starkville, Anna and I just have a brain moment. Oh, great. That happens.
It does.
Anyway, they have they have the business called Glow, and they just got a contract with Sesame Workshop. They're creating toys for autistic children at bath time. They decided to stay in Starkville, and they've renovated a downtown building. Now, granted, I know they probably have fiber. They probably have high-speed internet there. They also have access to, Mississippi State, which is really hitting on all cylinders right now. Mark Keenum's done a great job. So they've got access to that research and that talent pool. And I'm speaking as somebody with kids that are college age, that are thinking about where they're going to end up. And I don't know if they're going to end up in Mississippi. I hope they do. But, there's a lot of mamas right now that want to see their grandchildren. What is it going to take for Mississippi to retain 20-somethings that don't feel like they need to move to Nashville or Atlanta or Charlotte or some other place to be able to make a career?
Well, I wish I knew the definitive answer to that, because both my children have moved out of state, and I wish that they would be here with me, just like you.
Yeah.
What I tell them, and I would tell your friends in Starkville as well, that there's a really good reason to stay in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
You are needed here, and we've got to have these lights where there are businesses that are growing, where entrepreneurs are growing, where communities are doing better, and you can come back and be a bigger part of the fight. You go to California, you and I just be two more good government schmoes out there.
Yeah.
But we're needed here, but we can't ask them to sacrifice their children's educational future or opportunities. That's why I really hope that we'll start building our communities back and work on quality of life rather than tax cuts and cheap labor. That will give them back here opportunity. And as these 800,000 young people move into the voting population, you're going to see less fights about these culture wars or differences and more fights about good things, that how do we improve public schools? There are all kinds of different ways. Let's have that debate. And so that's my hope, is you got this younger group coming up, an awakening. And so we're going to move from the Ginners to the Do Betters. I hope in my lifetime, certainly in your young guy, your lifetime. The arc of history takes a while to bend here in Mississippi.
A few years ago, Gosh, hard to get. I can probably find the date here in my notes. You had your own segment on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. When the news came out that Mississippi had not that you had not filed the paperwork for the end slavery, which was not correct, but it was a story for a few days. I can't even remember if I did a cartoon on it. I'm not sure I did, because I think the correction came out faster than I could turn around and get a cartoon done on it. But you managed to actually get an apology out of Jon Stewart, even though it was kind of a weird apology because he was still making fun of your name. How surreal was that, having, you know, your 15 minutes of fame?
Well, it was actually 6 days of fame. So yeah. surreal would be the word. I was just stunned when I saw that. I got a call from a friend in Germany. He said, "Watch the Today Show." You know, I mean, not Today, Jon Stewart show. And so anyway, I was blown away because I'd spent most of my life trying to work to bring people across lines. But what really made me feel good is it was an overwhelming outpouring to Jon Stewart. And darn if he didn't apologize, which I think is hard for him. And
yeah, no, it was killing him. It really was.
You could see the pain in his face.
Yeah, if anybody wants to watch it, maybe I'll put a link to it in underneath this. It's called "The More You Molpus." He was just completely infatuated that your name was Dick Molpus. He was just having fun.
I still don't get it, but anyway.
No, that's fine. You know, hey, it could have been worse, but you had that.
Trust me.
Dick, you mentioned that you're selling off your stock to the company now. Obviously, it sounds like you're making another transition to the next stage. You know, obviously, you guys probably are going to do a little travel. You probably do that already. You're going to hunker down on your giving and so forth. Tell us about how you see the next 5 to 10 years of your life.
Well, I want to be a part of that change. When it's over, I want to say, look, to the very end, whether it's when I'm 80 or when my mother lived in 97 and watched bridge tournaments that same year. So I hope I've got some of those genetics. But then I was a part of changing it. And I'll never get there like I thought I was when I was 28 years old, come to work for Governor Winter. It is a lifelong journey. And I hope to be, and I am, at peace with what I was able to do. Made it a little better, couldn't fix everything, got beaten a few times, won a few, and all in all, pretty interesting and fulfilling life.
But wouldn't you say that, you know, I've never run for governor, I've never lost. I have no idea how absolutely bone crushing that is to go through that. But it was one of those things that it pivoted you and turned you into another chapter, and you were actually probably able to make even a larger difference for a longer period of time because of that defeat. So what advice would you give to somebody right now that's listening to this thinking that they've just suffered the worst defeat of their life?
Trust me, it's not the worst defeat of your life. That I don't know about you, but I've learned a lot more from my mess ups than I have from my successes. And don't be afraid to take those risks. I mean, that's great risk, great rewards, not reckless risk. You don't want to be a gadfly, or you don't want your business to crumble, but take a risk and bring some life into your life. And you know, we do business for a lot of important, wealthy people, and I see them at the end of their lives. A lot of them are older, and just making money. They got the big houses and the fancy cars and, you know, all those things, but they don't have their soul's not at peace. And I wonder if all that's worth it. So to the very end, I'm going to work on my foundation. I'm going to support the Medicaid thing. I'm just going to try to throw in with the do-betters and fight the beginners till I'm gone. Then we'll live those younger people.
So you're just going to walk past the portrait of Governor Winter and just say, I'm going to try to keep up with you.
I am. The cartoon you drew is hanging on my wall right here. So I look at it every day.
That means a lot that you've got it hanging there. The virus, thankfully, at least in Mississippi right now, knock on wood, the numbers they're still a little high, but they're, you know, I think the vaccines of the people that have taken it are, the bottom line is it looks like we're going to have a Neshoba County Fair this year.
I would say maybe, but don't forget around this East Mississippi, you've got the highest number of unvaccinated folks. So
Yeah.
look, I've been to 70 of these things in a row. So that thing is what you're talking about now is something I'm following. So the fair people say it's on. We'll see what the health people say as we get close. I hope
Yeah.
it's well enough. So,
That was pretty surreal last year, though, not having one.
like I said, my whole life, my mother took me when I was 1 year old. So yeah, surreal for me.
How long has your family had the cabin right there on Founder Square? Because you're right there by the post office and then the gateway to, I mean, really prime real estate on the fairground, on the way to the horse track from Founder Square.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's one thing I learned as a politician. The horse races start at 2:00. If you're speaking at 2:00, the entire audience gets up and leaves. So you always finish by 2:00. But no, my grandfather built that cabin in 1910.
Wow. Wow. So y'all had in the family a long time. Talk about, speaking. Of course, you've given a zillion political speeches in your life and other speeches. What was it like actually speaking there in front of your home crowd for all those years that you got to speak at the fair?
Oh, I loved it, because I knew most of the people there. The most interesting thing was when Governor Fordyce and I debated at the fair, and Governor Fordyce and I could not find common ground on anything.
Yeah.
So how politicians oftentimes have to shade this or shade this, but we didn't agree on anything, and that made it really fun to be a part of that. And it would just get me up every morning, because all these things I'm talking about, he was on the other side of it. So
yeah. That was the great woodshed moment, right?
Well, yes, actually, where he criticized my wife's the way she's as Southern drawl, and he criticized that. Yeah, and that's when I said I'd take him to the woodshed. I mean, it was really pretty much degenerating into a brawl by that time.
So it was like the Trump-Biden debate last year when they were, yeah.
Exactly, and when we had that debate fair, I think there were around 10,000 people there. His people were chanting 4 more years, and mine were chanting 4 more months, and people hollering and hooping and standing. It was a great occasion there. And I know that in Shelby County Fair, when I ran for Secretary of State, quick story.
Yeah.
In 1983, all the other candidates were talking about, I'm going to make it more efficient. You can get your deeds filed. But I didn't do any of that stuff. I had a friend. He did a great Gatsby routine, and we had the Neshoba Central Rockettes, who were like the Dixie, dancing thing.
Yeah.
And so they did a dance out in front. At the very end, they flipped over and they had MOLPUS on their tights and flipped them over. I got a standing ovation, and all the other Secretary of State candidates said, "You're gonna win this thing." I understand the fair.
It's about showmanship, that's for sure.
Showmanship, right?
Dick, as we're wrapping up here, I mean, like I said, I feel like I've probably missed 1,000 different things I probably should have asked you, but are there any final thoughts? Anything that I did miss?
No, thank you for giving me the opportunity to pontificate and to share my thoughts. No, it was very well covered.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I just like visiting with you. I mean, I look forward to, hopefully we do have the fair and I can sit down and get a cup of coffee or something or whatever, or iced tea or some banana pudding or something. I don't know. But
you're welcome.
Anyway, just good to catch up with you. And I thank you for visiting with us here on Mississippi Stories.
Thank you, Marshall. Thank you for having me.
Well, take care.
Take care.